When I found out he was the one directing this film, I was like, that's fantastic. I'm gonna love this movie. He's gonna do such a great job taking the parts from the book that I did enjoy and bringing that to the screen. I was wrong. My name is Serena. Welcome back to the Book to Movie Club. Today we are going to be talking about Poor Things, which I know I'm a month late, but that's because in the UK, movies don't come out at the same time as in the United States, which is a shame. But I finally got to watch it and I have so many thoughts. I did not think the movie could be any weirder than the book. We'll get into both of them, but I was wrong. So let's talk about it. Before we get into the book, let's talk a little bit about the author. So Poor Things was written by Alexander Gray, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who is a Scottish, or was a Scottish author and artist. A lot of his art is actually in the book. He's illustrated part of it, so some of the characters have been illustrated and are in the book, as well as very random body parts. I don't know. He wrote 9 books between 1981 and 2007. His books are usually about Glasgow realism and fantasy, but Poor Things was described as a magnificently brisk, funny, dirty, brainy book by the London Review of Books, which I would agree with. I don't know if it's great. The novel, Poor Things, won the Whitbread Award and the Guardian Fiction Prize in 1992, the year it was published. Here's a quick synopsis of the book from Storygraph. In the 1880s in Glasgow, Scotland, medical student Archibald McCandless finds himself enchanted with the intriguing creature known as Bella Baxter, supposedly the product of the fiendish scientist Godwin Baxter. Bella was resurrected for the sole purpose of fulfilling the whims of her benefactor. As his desire turns to obsession, Archibald's motives to free Bella are revealed to be as selfish as Godwin's, who claims her body and soul. Just by the synopsis, this sounds like a weird book. And I've been doing this thing recently where I don't read the synopsis of a book before I read it. I just dive right in. And that's, like I said, that's what I did for this book. And so I didn't know what to expect. And I was unpleasantly surprised by everything that happened in this book. It is such a weird book. But let me tell you a little bit more about it. So the book opens, the first chapter of the book that we're reading is an author explaining that how he came across this manuscript of McCandless's story, or retelling of how he met and fell in love with Bella. Apparently this manuscript written by McCandless was found somewhere by the author's friend, who with the manuscript found a letter from McCandless's wife, Bella, letting us all know that everything in this manuscript is a lie. But the man who ends up publishing the manuscript, who is unnamed, says that he's done all this research that proves that McCandless's retelling of the situation is in fact true. He doesn't have any evidence. He doesn't provide any evidence to the publisher. He doesn't even have the original manuscript that was found to give to the publisher. So what is published is his writings about what was found in this manuscript that Bella says, or Victoria. She has 2 names from her first life and second. It's all very confusing. But this book basically is what this unidentified author says McCandless wrote in this manuscript. Anyway, I don't know how to describe this book, but it's up to you to decide if the manuscript is the truth, if Victoria's letter is telling the truth. Who knows what's true? And I think that question is the most interesting part of this book. But the rest of it is a hot mess. The original manuscript tells the story of how Archibald McCandless, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I'm just going to refer to him as Candle. But it tells the story of how Candle met and fell in love with and eventually married Bella Baxter. Bella was a woman who was found by Godwin Baxter after she attempted to take her own life. I guess she kind of did, and was then brought back to life by Godwin Baxter by taking, and stay with me here, he took the unborn fetus that was inside of Bella Baxter She was 9 months pregnant when she died. Removed the brain from that baby and put it inside of Bella's brain. As a result, she had the brain development of a newborn child, but was developing much more rapid than an infant would have. So when Candle first meets Bella, she's walking around mumbling as if she is a toddler. And somehow he's so enamored by her beauty that he wants to marry her. Make it make sense. It doesn't. I don't know. Candle proposes to Bella, I think the second time they see each other. But Godwin asks that they spend a little bit of time apart before they decide to get married. It's supposed to be 2 weeks, but Bella describes that for her, 2 weeks feels like 2 years because she's developing so quickly. So in this time, she meets another man who's like, hey, marry me. And they run off together and elope without actually being legally married. But they go on this long European cruise for their honeymoon. And in that time, Godwin and Candle receive 2 letters, one from the man and one from Bella, describing the events that have taken place over the course of this honeymoon. And this is my favorite part of the book. I think this is the only part of the book that I was actually entertained by, because comparing their 2 versions of what happened, I think is hilarious, because it's a hot mess. No matter which one you believe, they're both a mess. So this man that Bella elopes with says that Bella stole him for everything that he's worth, left him penniless and in the madhouse, basically. While Bella says that on their travels, he becomes addicted to gambling and loses all of his money. Bella gives him the last of her money that she had stashed away from Godwin in case of emergency, and then has to become a sex worker in order to try and pay her way back to Scotland, which is a mess. And when that doesn't actually work out, she ends up going to one of Godwin's colleagues, who she knows is in Paris, and he pays for her trip back to Scotland. And when that happens, I was like, why didn't she just do that in the first place? I don't know. In the book, it describes that Bella wanted to finally have work experience. She wanted to make a way for herself because she's been living under Godwin for so long. But it just seemed like an interesting choice, in my opinion. Again, everything is my opinion. When she arrives back in Scotland, Bella is ready to get married to Candle. But of course, it couldn't go off without a hitch. When they get to the church, her first husband is there with her father, waiting to call this whole thing off, waiting to object, because she is already legally married as Victoria Blessington to this man whose name I don't remember. I don't know. Bella chooses to hear him out and try to understand more about the situation, give Godwin a chance to explain herself. And when she realizes the reason that she wanted to take her own life in the first place, which is what got her in this situation with Godwin, she realizes that a life with her first husband is not one that she wants to live. And so she chooses to stay with Godwin and with Candle and lives happily ever after, basically. That is keeping it brief. I think people really love this book, and especially people from Glasgow. I know it holds a very special place in their hearts because how much it represented, as this quote says, Glasgow at the time and a part of Glasgow's cultural history. And I think that's a beautiful thing to read about, but that's not what the book is about. And I don't really like the book. I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of a person written in the time that this book was published, but it was only 1992. And some of it just feels very misogynistic. It feels like a description of a misogynistic male's fantasy of being with a childlike woman, because it's this woman who has the brain of an infant, but every man that she meets wants to marry her. And I just don't get it. I don't get it. So it's not for me, and that's fine. The book does talk a lot about politics at the time in Glasgow, Scotland, and around the world. But in those parts when Bella is learning about the world, it just drags on, and it's a little too brainy for me, and it's not very entertaining. And I just wanted to skip paragraphs because I was like, what are we doing? Let's move on. This book is too strange for me to try to tell you any more about. And I think it is weird enough that I do recommend, hesitantly, I recommend that you read it just so you can experience how weird it is. Even if you've already seen the movie. If you've seen the movie, you know the movie is weird. But they're not the same. And so I think it is important to read the book. So anyway, let's get to the movie and we'll talk more about my comparison of the two. Those are my thoughts about the book, but let's get into the movie, which I am so mad that I sat through 2 hours and 21 minutes of this film when I only liked the last 5 minutes, if we're being honest. The film was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, whose name I'm probably butchering, but he's an amazing director. He's directed a lot of films that I've really enjoyed, including The Favorite and The Killing of the Sacred Deer, which if you haven't watched that, please go watch it. When I found out he was the one directing this film, I was like, that's fantastic. I'm gonna love this movie. He's gonna do such a great job taking the parts from the book that I did enjoy and bringing that to the screen. I was wrong. I want to give a little bit of a shout out to the cinematographer, Robbie Ryan, because I think the cinematography is amazing. The editors as well. I think there's a lot that goes into making a movie look visually appealing. I don't know what all those things are, but I feel like I need to give a shout out to the cinematographer, so there you go. So before I watched this movie, I'd heard nothing but good things. Obviously, at this point, it's award winning. I think it won Best Comedy or Musical at the Golden Globes. Emma Stone has won an award for it. And Mark Ruffalo, I think. I can't remember. The Critics' Choice Awards just happened, so I'm not sure if they won any awards there, but people have been loving it. It has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes and it's certified fresh. I know some people, it's like Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes. Metacritic usually has a lower score than Rotten Tomatoes, but I like Rotten Tomatoes. So I was like, if it's certified fresh, it's gonna be good. And I think on Metacritic, it had like an 87. I can't remember, but that feels high on Metacritic. So I was like, this must be good. But how it got these ratings is beyond me because it's not a good movie. Sometimes I'll watch movies and think I'm the idiot. Like, I don't get it. Everyone loves it, so there must be something wrong with me. But it took me finally going to my most trusted source, which is the San Francisco Chronicle movie review section, for me to realize and get the validation I needed that I am not alone. This is not a good movie. I'll have the full review from the SF Chronicle date book in the description, but here is the first paragraph. Poor Things is not as funny as it tries to be, not as emotional as it is intended to be, and not as wise as the filmmakers believe it to be. It was made with ambitions to be provocative, while it caters to its audience's already held beliefs. The movie's not good, and this is not the fault of the director, in my opinion, because the acting is great. Or like I said, the cinematographer. The bone I have to pick is with Tony McNamara. I don't know how to, I'm sorry. Names are hard for me, okay? Tony McNamara. I don't know. Who wrote this screenplay? This is a terrible screenplay. He read this book and he was like, you know which part we need to focus on? The sex. Everything that takes place at this brothel, let's make that an hour of the movie. Why? Why is it necessary to see Emma Stone having sex with every man in France? There's one scene in particular that is it's not in the book. It is not in the book. And it's disturbing. And I don't know if we're meant to laugh at inappropriate sexual scenes with children. It's so bad. And this is a spoiler, but I'm just going to tell you. So this whole thing has been a spoiler. Emma Stone is having sex with whoever she wants. Again, she needs the money, but she's also viewing it as an opportunity to have more sex. She's like, I've only had sex with one person. This is my chance to see if he's really the best, or if there's someone better. One of the men that come into the brothel says that he's there to teach his sons how to have sex. So there's two boys watching them do their thing, and they're taking notes while they're doing it. I'm looking around the theater like, is everybody watching what I'm watching? Because this is disturbing. I didn't like it. So, Tony, you need to try again. Because it's truly like, I would be embarrassed. And I would imagine that the author of this book RIP, but I don't think he would have liked this interpretation. It's really bad. And that's more of what it feels like. It feels like an interpretation of this book rather than an adaptation. If that makes any sense. Because it's just, how are you even more outlandish than the source material when the source material is weird as fuck? Anyway, I'm sorry. I was so mad that I watched this movie. The casting was fantastic though. I wish I had the casting director to give a shout out to. Jared Carmichael was in it, which I was happy to see, but it wasn't his best acting, if we're being honest. And then Rami Youssef, who plays Candle in the film, but he has not been in much of the publicity, which I think is a real shame, because the manuscript is about Bella, but the book itself is about Candle's experience with Bella. And so he's just as much of a main character in this as Bella is, or should have been, in my opinion. But that wasn't showcased here, or at least when it came to publicity, it didn't seem like they viewed it that way, which I think is a shame. One character who is such a big part of the book, but is not in the movie, is Glasgow. And I like to think sometimes a place can also be a character. Glasgow was obviously a very big part of the book, but they chose not to even base the film in Glasgow for whatever reason. Instead, the film takes place in a hyper-realistic London. This is the only picture that I can find online to show you of the sets in this movie. They are very interesting, but also really confusing because it's supposed to, in the book, it's 1880, but they've taken it into this kind of, if 1880 was the future situation, which looks nice, but it's a weird choice. So that's my opinion. I think the weirdest part of the movie and the most disappointing part of the movie is how Bella discovers her sexuality. One day she wakes up from being knocked out cold and just starts touching herself. And I feel inappropriate. I like whispered a little bit, but she just starts touching herself. And I'm like, there's no point. Sex is a big part of the book. I don't want to deny that, but it comes up in a more natural way than in the movie. And I think the movie, at a certain point, she masturbates one time and then she's at the breakfast table because she's still a child. So of course she's doing inappropriate things, but she takes an apple off of the breakfast table and starts masturbating with it. Make it make sense. Why? Why would anyone do that? It's so disturbing. So yeah, I hated that part. All in all, this movie is really disappointing. And I really hoped that it was going to be better. There are so many parts, like the whole book being a part of the movie is what I wanted, including this author finding the manuscript. And I wanted there to be some tension between the real Victoria and this author as to what parts of this story are true. I think that would have been really interesting. I was also very excited to see how they would show this difference in retellings of the honeymoon between Bella and the man that she elopes with, but that doesn't happen. And so I left feeling disappointed. I left confused first and then disappointed. Those are my thoughts. If you have different thoughts, if you loved this movie, let me know in the comments. If you agree with me, let me know in the comments because I need more validation on my opinion. And when it comes to which was better, I think my answer is clear. The book is way better than this movie. This movie is garbage and it deserves to go in the trash. And I think it's a shame because it just feels like the manuscript, it being created and it getting all of these nominations just feels like a representation of the male whiteness in Hollywood. And that's what they want to see and I don't. So hopefully the next one will be better. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for watching my rant about how terrible the Poor Things movie is. Leave your thoughts below and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next video. I'll see you then.